Gemara says in Bava Basra, Daf Yud Daled Amid Beis, Moshe Kosav Sifroi U Parshas Bilam v'Iyov. That Moshe Rabbeinu wrote his sefer, and he also wrote the parsha of Bilam and Iyov. So you see that it's a ravusa, it's a chiddush, that Moshe Rabbeinu not only wrote Sifroi, his sefer, which l'chora means the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, but he also wrote Parshas Bilam. I say that Parshas Bilam is different than the rest of the Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Not clear why is it different. Why would we think that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write it? And we also see that in spite of the fact that we say that he did write it, but it's still not part of Sifroi. Moshe Rabbeinu Kosav Sifroi, he wrote his book, so to speak, and he wrote also the Parsha of Bilam. Why is the Parsha of Bilam not part of Sifroi? You know, Rashi says, what's Parshas Bilam? Rashi over there in Bava Basra says, Nivu Osoi, Bilam's prophecy, Umesholav, his parables. Afal Pisha Einon Tzorchei Moshe, V'toirosoi, V'seidem Masav. So Rashi is actually trying to explain what's the chiddush, that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it, and Rashi says that he wrote it in spite of the fact that it's not Tzorchei Moshe, it's not from the needs of Moshe. V'toirosoi, it's not something that's necessary for Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah. V'seder Masav, it's not something that's part of Moshe Rabbeinu's Seder HaMaisim. It's not one of the things he did. In other words, Sifroi, you know, when the Gemara over there says, Shmuel Kosaf Sifroi, Yeshua Kosaf Sifroi, so those the Sifroi in that context means what they did, what Yeshua accomplished, what happened during his lifetime, what he was involved in. The same about Shmuel. When it says Shmuel Kosaf Sifroi V'Sefer Shoftim, Rashi says Shekulam Kodmuloi, the Shoftim were before Shmuel. The Kosaf Sifron, Umasha also Yisrael B'Yemeihen. Shmuel wrote not only his story, he also wrote what happened before him. So therefore, Sifroi Shel Moshe would only include what Moshe Rabbeinu was involved in. What happened with Bilam happened outside the Gvul Yisrael. I mean, the Yidden weren't even aware at the time that it was happening. So therefore, it wouldn't be part of Sifroi. And it's a chiddush that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote not only Sifroi, but he also wrote the Parshas Bilam. But we still can only wonder, because it's true that Yeshua wrote Sifroi, his history. Shmuel wrote what happened in his time. But Moshe Rabbeinu's Chamisha Chumshei Torah, Zichru Torahs Moshe Avdi, it includes everything from Brias Ha'olam, Adam Arishon Noach, the Ovis. I mean, it's not just the story of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. The Chamisha Chumshei Torah include everything that's Torah. So how could it be that we would have a Havamina that Moshe Rabbeinu wouldn't write the Parshas Bilam? That's why Rashi writes, it's not Tzorchei Moshe, V'soy Rosoy, V'seder Masov. Not only is it not something that Moshe Rabbeinu was involved in, but this is something that's not necessary for Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah B'chlal. The Parshas Bilam is something that's irrelevant to Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah. But that's kind of strange. I mean, how does Rashi know that Parshas Bilam is something that's not relevant to Moshe Rabbeinu's Torah? Actually, the Rambam in Hilchis Malachim, Reish Perek Yud Aleph, says HaMelech HaMashiach osid la'amoid u'lahachzir Malchus David liyoshna, etc. V'chol misha einoi ma'amin boy, or misha einoi mechake leviyosoi, somebody that doesn't believe in Mashiach or is not waiting for his coming, which I think is coming to exclude those that think he already came, so he's not waiting for him to come. Loi b'shar haneviyim bilvad hu kofer, ela b'Torah u'b'Moshe Rabbeinu. So somebody that doesn't believe in Mashiach and is not waiting for Mashiach to come is not just a kofer b'divrei shar haneviyim, but he's also a kofer in the Torah and in Moshe Rabbeinu. Shaharei HaTorah Hi'idol. Shenema v'shov Hashem Elokecha shvuscha in Parshas Nitzavim. It says that we will be redeemed. And he says, "Ve'elu advarim ha'mefuroshim b'Torah hin koilulim kol advarim shenemru al yidei hanavim." That v'shov Hashem Elokecha shvuscha is telling us that we will be redeemed, and it includes everything that appears in the Nevi'im. And then the Rambam adds, "Af beParshas Bilom nemar v'shom nibei b'shnei hamashichim b'Mashiach harishon shu David shoishias Yisrael miyad zorehem u'b'Mashiach ha'achron she'omed b'bonav she'Moshiach as bonav ba'achroino v'shom u'omer ar'enu v'loi ato ze David ashurenu v'loi korev ze melech haMashiach." So it's clear in the Rambam that even though we know from the Torah that there will be a redemption, but the idea of a personal Messiah only appears in the Chamishi Chumshei Torah in Parshas Bilam. So it's actually, the Rambam counts the belief in a personal Messiah as one of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. So it's very hard to understand how Rashi can say that the Parshas Bilam is not Tzorech Moshe v'Toirosoi v'Seder Masa. It's one of the principles of Torah. How could we say that the Parshas Bilam is not one of the is not Mi'ikri HaTorah? The Rambam in the Geras Teimun also is marich that we know about Mashiach from the Parsha of Bilam. Now you know the Ritva on Daf Tes Vav Amud Aleph in Bava Basra says, "Hoda Amrina the Moshe." Shekosaf Sifroi uParshas Bilam nir in Divrei ha'omrim she'ein zu Parshas Bilam haksuva b'Torah. The Ritva says it would seem to me, I agree with those that say that when the Gemara says Parshas Bilam, it's not referring to Parshas Balak the way we have it. Elo Parsha b'fnei atzmai shekosaf v'herich bo Yosef v'hoisam etzuyalam. There was a Ksav Yad that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote a long story about Bilam, which we don't have. So besides for Sifroi that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Chamishi Chumshei Torah, he also wrote Parshas Bilam. He says, "Parsha b'fnei atzmo shekosav v'herich bo Yosef v'hoisam etzuyalam." So in other words, this Shita holds that the Parshas Bilam, the way we have it, Avad is part of Torah, and it's no Chiddush that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it. But the Gemara is referring to another Parsha that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote, which we don't have. So also says the Tziyuni al HaTorah, which is a Sefer Kadmon. He says, "Yitoin HaToyin, v'haloi Parshas Bilam b'chlal HaTorah hi, u'mai Chiddush." I mean, Parshas Bilam is part of the Torah. What's the Chiddush that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it? And he says, "V'haloi Dava Yudua, hu shekol HaTorah mi Bereishis, ad la'enei kol Yisrael, mi piv shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu la'oznei shel Moshe," etc. Eloda, ki ksuvim kan bekoitzer, be'inyan Bilam u'benavurosei liYisrael l'fisho. It's written over here in short. V'gam kitzer hakosov be'inyan chochmas haksomim k'moshe kitzer be'inyan avodah zarah shel dor enosh shelei siper b'hakosov klal. The Torah never described to us what all the avodah zarahs of dor enosh were about. V'chiber boy Avram Avinu olav hashalom sefer shehoyu boy arba meos prokim. The Gemara tells us in avodah zarah that Moshe Rabbeinu had a sefer of 400 prokim in which he refuted all the various avodah zarahs that he encountered. So he said, "V'chein b'melchemes Midyon shoher mafriach malkei Midyon ba'avir v'chulei v'nireh midas razal ki Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom chiber sefer levad ma shekosav." Moshe Rabbeinu had his own sefer. V'sham siper kol ha'inyan ba'orech v'ne'evad ha'sefer ahu k'Moshe nevdu svarim acherim. So says the Tziyuni al HaTorah. The Ramami Fano in his Sefer Asor Mamoris writes similarly. He writes Parshas Bilam when the Gemara says Parshas Bilam, Hu Mashekosov b'Yoshua in Kapitel Yud Gimel in Yoshua. There's two psukim about the story of Bilam. V'hi Megillah shemosar Moshe liYoshua v'kosov bo. There's Bilam ben Be'or haKoseim horgu b'nei Yisrael b'chorav al chaloleihem u'poirash b'kosov zeh avoynei v'oinshoy. But I did the Zutra Parsha Zu, since it's a very short Parsha, Taflo Yoshua l'Sifroi, because it's only two psukim. So all these three sources are saying that when the Gemara says Parshas Bilam, it's not referring to what we have in our Parshas Balak, but either it's a sefer that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote at length, and we don't have it, or it's the two psukim that appear in Sefer Yoshua, and the Gemara is attributing the writing of these two psukim to Moshe Rabbeinu, in spite of the fact that they appear in Sefer Yoshua. But this is Avada Chiddush. The Pasuk of Pshat Parshas Bilam is the Parshas Bilam that we know. The Gemara would be referring to a Parshas Bilam that we don't know. The stomach of the Gemara would talk it out, because the Gemara already didn't have the Parshas Bilam that these Rishonim are talking about. Rashi is clearly mashma that is talking about our Parshas Bilam. The Yad Ramah actually is Goris in the Gemara, Parshas Bilam Haksuva Boy. Moshe Rabbeinu Kosav Sifroi, Parshas Bilam Haksuva Boy. So the nusach of the Ramah clearly says that we're talking about the Parshas Bilam that's written boy in our Sefer Torah. So the question is, if that's the pshat, what's the chiddush that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it? Why would we think that he didn't write it? So it would be a talking, according to the Goyen, in his biurim on the Tikkunei Zohar. In Tikkun Lamed Tes, in the Tikkunei Zohar, on Daf Ayin Tes Amud Aleph, it says, Chamshin Zimnin Itkar Ba'oraisa Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Zohar says that Yetzias Mitzrayim is mentioned 50 times in the Torah. And there's a whole to-do, how does the Zohar say that it's 50 times? The Ramak, in his one of his Svarim, and the Ramami Fano in one of his Svarim, they ask that if you count, you find Yetzias Mitzrayim in the Torah 90 times, not 50 times. And the Zohar says that Yetzias Mitzrayim is mentioned in the Torah 50 times. And they have various suggestions how to make the cheshbon that it should come out 50 times. But the Goyen in his biurim on the Tikkunei Zohar says, True, Yetzias Mitzrayim is mentioned much more than 50 times, but we're only counting those times where Moshe Rabbeinu was told to say it to Klal Yisrael. And he said, begin do idkar, which is a lashon of saying it to Klal Yisrael. And he goes through the whole cheshbon where the 50 times are. And in the end, he says like this, that in Mishnah Torah, we have 23 times. And in the other 4 Chumashim, we have 27 times. Okay. So 27 and 23 add up to 50. But he says, nevertheless, even though it's 27 and 23, we count them as 25 and 25. Where does he get that 25 and 25? Be a little patient, and it's not so complicated. He says, because the Zohar says, the hemshich to the fact that the Zohar says that Yetzias Mitzrayim is mentioned 50 times in the Torah, the Zohar goes on and says, Dohi vayifen koi v'choi. This is alluded to in the pasuk of vayifen koi v'choi, which is 25 chafei v'chafei. Be'ilein chamshin asvon, the meyachdin li b'chol yoyme pa'amayim shma Yisrael d'isboin chafei v'chafei asvon. So the Zohar says that every day when a Yid says Kriya Shema, he says Shema Yisrael and Baruch Shem. Shema Yisrael has 25 letters, and Baruch Shem has 25 letters, and that's the Vayifen Koi V'choi. And this Koi V'choi, the 25 plus 25, are Mechuvim Keneged the 50 times that Yetzias Mitzrayim is mentioned in the Torah. So the Goyen is being bothered. Now that we said that in Mishnah Torah we have 23, and in the other 4 Chumashim we have 27, why are we counting them as 25 and 25? It's 27 and 23. So the Goyen says that the 25, there were 25, these are 2 groups. There are 25 that were given in an oifen of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi shel Moshe, and 25 on the level of Moshe mipi atzmoi amoron. Because about Mishnah Torah, the Gemara says in Megillah Daf Lamed Aleph that Moshe mipi atzmoi amoron, Moshe is speaking in his own name, not in his own name. He's talking from himself in the name of the Rebbeinu Shalom, as opposed to the other Chumashim, where Moshe Rabbeinu is Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. And the Mela says the Goyen, with this you'll understand that 25 of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi and 25 of Moshe mipi atzmoi. How is it? L'maisa, it's only 23 in Mishnah Torah. But there are two, says the Goyen, that appear in the Dalet Chumashim that are also in the level of mipi atzmoi and not on the level of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. And that's the two times that it's mentioned in Parshas Balak. He says, it says, Keil moitzio mi Mitzrayim in this week's Parsha, and then again it says, Keil moitzio mi Mitzrayim. These two times, in spite of the fact that they appear in the Dalet Chumashim, which in general is Moshe, is Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi, nevertheless, they're on the lower level of Moshe mipi atzmoi amoron, like in Mishnah Torah, and therefore we have koi v'choi. We have 25 and 25. Meir Shlomo, you just shut the thing, or you're gone, Meir Shlomo? We don't know. Okay, so we see two things from the guy. We see two things. We see two things from the guy. One thing is that the nevuos of Bilam, Moshe Rabbeinu was told to say it to Klal Yisrael, because the Zohar is talking over here about the 50 times of that Yetzias Mitzrayim is mentioned, where Moshe Rabbeinu was told to tell it to Klal Yisrael. So we know now that this nevuah of Bilam, Moshe Rabbeinu was told to tell it to Klal Yisrael. We also see that in spite of the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu was told to say these nevuahs to Klal Yisrael, but it was nevertheless not on the level of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi like the rest of the Torah, but it was only on the level of Moshe mipi atzmoi amoron, like the Sefer Mishnah Torah. From where does the Goyen get the knowledge? I mean, we don't know, but let's say if we would want to understand, how could we understand that there's a hechrich, that the nevuos Bilam, that Moshe Rabbeinu was told to prophesy to Klal Yisrael, was only on the level of Moshe mipi atzmoi, and it wasn't on the level of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. I can say like this, because in the Sifri, in the end of Parshas Balak, on the pasuk v'lo kom navi oid b'Yisrael k'Moshe, the Sifri, as we know, says b'Yisrael lo kom aval b'umos ha'olam kom umanoi Bilam, that Bilam's level of nevuah was equal to Moshe Rabbeinu's level of nevuah. Now, Moshe Rabbeinu's level of nevuah was bas baklaria hameira, and many other things about the nevuah of Moshe. L'chorah, the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah was Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi is also one of the qualities of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah. If so, if we say that Bilam's nevuah was on the level of Moshe Rabbeinu's nevuah, probably Bilam's nevuah was also in the way of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. So it could be that that's why we say that when Moshe Rabbeinu was choizer u'misnabe the nevuah to Klal Yisrael, it wasn't Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi, because the Shechina already said that through the groinoi of Bilam. And therefore, over here, it was Moshe Rabbeinu was told to say this nevuah to Klal Yisrael, but it was no longer Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. It was like Mishnah Torah, where it's Moshe mipi atzmoi amor. Lefizeh, I want to say, so there is a special Ravusa and Chiddush in the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Parshas Balak, because we could have thought that Moshe Rabbeinu only wrote in a voice that he was Nisnabe in the Oifen of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. This nevuah, he wasn't Nisnabe in the Oifen of Shechina medaberes mitoich groinoi. Maybe he didn't write it. However, what I'm saying doesn't make sense, because Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Mishnah Torah, and Mishnah Torah, the Gemara says in Megillah Daf Lamed Aleph, is Moshe mipi atzmoi amoron. So this doesn't explain why we would think that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write Parshas Balak. However, in the Pirush Ein Yaakov, on the there's a Sefer Ein Yaakov, a collection of Agodas Chazal, and there's a Pirush Ein Yaakov on he's Rabbi Shayo Pinto that explains as follows. He says that but that's Rashi. He says that Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifra. He's also bothered. What's the chiddush that Moshe Rabbeinu was Kosaf Sifra? Avada Moshe Rabbeinu wrote the Torah. So he says, but that's Rashi that Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifra means the Sefer Mishnah Torah. Shezen nikra al Shem Moshe kediksiv zichru Torahs Moshe. Mashein kishara Torah kduma al payim shana l'fnei b'yis olam. So he says Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifra means that he wrote Sefer Mishnah Torah. Parshas Balak, afal pi sheksuva b'Torahs Hashem, even though it's written in the first 4 chalokim of the Torah, and that we say was written before Moshe Rabbeinu. Mikol makom nichtava al yidei Moshe, kiven shehoisa miniviei umas ha'olam lo nichtava al yidei HaKadosh Baruch Hu ba'atzma. So he has this interesting shot that Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifrei means he wrote Mishnah Torah, because the rest of Torah the Rebbeinu Shalom himself wrote. Whatever exactly that's supposed to mean, I can't explain to you because I don't know. But he says that Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifrei, and he also wrote the Parshas Balak because it's on a lower level, because it's a nevuah of Nevi'ei Umas Ha'olam. So I just want to say, with him and without him, if we say, like he says, that Sifrei is referring to Mishnah Torah, so then we can say that Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifrei Parshas Balak means that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote not only the first 4 parts of Torah, but he also wrote Sifrei, which is Mishnah Torah, and he also wrote Parshas Balak. And now with the Goyim, we can say that what's special about these 2 things, Sifrei referring to Mishnah Torah, and Parshas Balak, what's unique about these 2 things is that these are 2 things that are Moshe Mipi Atzmai Amora. And therefore, I would think before this Gemara that Moshe Rabbeinu only wrote the 4 books of Moses, and he didn't write the 5th. We would also think that he didn't write the Parshas Balak. Why would we think these 2 things? Because these are things that are Moshe Mipi Atzmai Amora, Kamash Malon, that Moshe Rabbeinu Kosaf Sifrei Parshas Balak. Okay, but the Ramah, he says that Sifrei, Sefer Torah. That's the Pashtum Pshat is Avada, not like the Ein Yaakov, that Sifrei means Mishnah Torah. But that Sifrei is the ganze Torah. As it's Mefurish in Yerushalmi and Soita Perekei Avachavov, Moshe Kosaf Chamisha Chumshei Torah. The Chazar v'Kosaf Parshas Balak u'Balak. So it's clear that Sifrei is referring to Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And we're saying Chamisha Chumshei Torah plus Parshas Balak. So the question comes back. So what's the chiddush about Parshas Balak? Okay. So let's say like this. In Mishnah Torah, even though it's lacking the Madrega, it's lacking the Madrega of Shechina Medaberes Mitoich Groinoi. Mishnah Torah is Moshe Mipi Atzmai Amorim, but Avada, that's only this particular detail that's lacking in Mishnah Torah. We say that it's not Shechina Medaberes Mitoich Groinoi, but all the other qualities of Nevuas Moshe Avada we have in Mishnah Torah also. Aspaklari Ameira, B'marav V'lei B'chidois, Ponim El Ponim. Avada, all the other things that we say about Nevuas Moshe are true about Mishnah Torah also. So all of Torah is that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote is a nevuah of Aspaklaria Hameira. So now, in the Sefer Be'er Mayim Chaim, in this week's Parsha, so also in the pre-Tzadik of Reb Tzadik HaKohen and Parshas Yisroi, and so also in the end of the Shilas Teshuvas Ma'aril Diskin, there's a shtickle over there, where all these 3 are mechavan l'davar echad. They say that the prophecies that Avram had, that Yitzchak had, that Yaakov had, they say that those prophecies were not Bas Baklaria Hameira, because only Moshe Rabbeinu was Zoichet to that level of B'mare V'loi B'chivas. But they say when Moshe Rabbeinu wrote it in the Torah, the pshat is that he was Choizer U'Misnabe. He re-prophesied that original prophecy, and he brought it to the level of Aspaklaria Hameira. Until that point, it was Chidos. And through Moshe Rabbeinu, it took on the level of Mare V'loi B'chidos. And that's how it becomes part of Torah's Moshe. Because to be part of Torah's Moshe, it has to be a nevuah of B'mare V'loi B'chidos. It has to be a nevuah of Aspaklaria Hameira. And they say, all these three say, that this is the difference between Parshas Bilam and the rest of Torah. Because Bilam himself was Misnabe Bas Baklaria Hameira. His nevuah was on the same level as the nevuah of Moshe Rabbeinu. And the Mela, this nevuah was not upgraded through Moshe Rabbeinu. All other nevuahs were upgraded through Moshe Rabbeinu. But the nevuah of Bilam was left as is because it already was a nevuah of Bas Baklaria Hameira. He just recorded it. And therefore, we would have a Kasol Kadaitach that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't write it. Because Moshe Rabbeinu's writing represents the idea of upgrading the previous prophecies from the Madrega of Chidos to the Madrega of Mara. And over here, that upgrading wasn't necessary. The emes, you see from the fact that the Rambam says that Misha Einoi Ma'amin B'Bias HaMoshiach Loi B'Nevuas Shar HaNeviim Bilvad Hu Koifer Ela B'Torah U'B'Moshe Rabbeinu. You see that these nevuahs about Mashiach that appear in Parshas Bilam took on the level of nevuahs Moshe Rabbeinu, because a koifer b'Moshe Rabbeinu means he's being koifer Moshe Rabbeinu, who represents that madrega of clarity of Aspaklari Amira. So you see that Moshe Rabbeinu actually, when he re-prophesized it on the madrega of Aspaklari Amira. Could be that that's all part of what we're saying, that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote Parshas Bilam, meaning that even though there was no need to bring this nevuah to a madrega of Aspaklari Amir, but nevertheless, Moshe Rabbeinu saw this nevuah like all his own nevuahs, Aspaklari Hameira, even though it was already seen by Bilam Aspaklari Hameira. When Azoy states in the Shloh HaKodesh of this week's parsha, where he writes, "Ubazei Yizbar Masha Amru Moshe Kosav Sifrei Parshas Bilam," and why and what, he asks all the questions. Elo Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Hashem Hisig Masha Hisig Bilam Be'inyan Nevuah Al Ha'osiv LiYisrael B'Chol HaBrochis Ki Moshe Kosav Kol HaTorah Mitzad HaSogas Nevuah Soy Kach Inyan Parshas Bilam V'ru Yehoisa Parsha Zu Loymar Al Yedei Moshe Rabbeinu B'li Emtzo'us Bilam Rak L'Hiyoisa Kateges HaNegor U'Kemoshe Amarnu V'Davar Zeh Dafka Al Yedei Bilam. Anyway, he says Moshe Rabbeinu prophesied this like everything else that he prophesied. Bilam also did. And that was in order that the Katega should be a Sneger. So it also says in the Maharal and the Chidushei Agodas in Bava Basra, the Yeroy Elisha, Bo Loymar, Ki Moshe ben Nevuasa Hiskin, Al Kol Nevuas Bilam, Shekach Hoyol Mipia Kodesh Baruch Hu, V'loy Toyma Shem Kosav Moshe b'Torah Shekach HaMabilam. It's not that Moshe Rabbeinu is recording the Nevuas Bilam, but he is having the Nevuah that Bilam had. Okay, so Avada to us, the whole thing, the fact that Bilam was a Navi is impossible to understand. Allah is kama v'cha. The Rambam says in Hilchos Yesod HaTorah, Ein hanevuah cholo, elo al chacham godel b'chachma, v'lo yeh yitzur mizgaber olav b'shum davar sheba'olam, elo hu mizgaber al yitzur tomit. Bilam is ayin roh, ruach gevoya v'nefesh rechava, and he reached the level that the Mem Ches Neviim, the Zayin Nevios, She'amdu Lahem Yisrael were in Zoicha. He reached the madrega of being a Navi like Moshe Rabbeinu. So in all these three above mentioned sources, the Be'er Ma'im Chaim, Reb Tzodek, and Reb Shua Leib, they all say that the Pshah is like this, that a nevuah that's seen as chidos, so it requires interpretation. And the interpretation is the interpretation of the Navi al derech Pisra and Chalon. And therefore, Bilam, who was an Ayin Ra and a Nefesh Rechova and a Ruach Gvoya, if it would be left to his interpretation, it would become negative. The only way to entrust someone like Bilam with Nevuah was that it should be B'mara V'loi B'chidus. It should be Bas Baklaria HaMe'ira. It should not require interpretation, and it should not be given to interpretation. So in other words, we would be better. The Rebbeinu Shalom have to give the Umas Olam a Navi, but to entrust the Navi, somebody like Bilam, with a nevuah that is bechidos, that wouldn't be a way to go, and therefore his nevuah was bas baklaria hamiira. Now you know that the Gemara says in Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Hey, with regards to the brachas of Bilam, Amar Rabbi Abba Bar Kahana, Kulam Chazru Leklala, that all Bilam's klalas were chazru brachas, were chazru leklala. Chutz mi bate kneisiyas ubate midrashis. Ma toivu alecha Yaakov mishkaneisecha Yisrael. That is the only thing that remained a bracha. Shenemar vayafoich Hashem Elokecha lecho es haklala levracha. In Parshas Kiseitze, ki ahivcha Hashem Elokecha klala v'loi klalois. The pasuk uses a singular term. The pasuk says, "Vayafoich Hashem es haklolo levracha." So the Gemara says on the Kuf Hey Beis in Sanhedrin, only one klala was nefach levracha, and that's ma toivu alecha Yaakov. All the other brachas, which were really miskavan leklala, they turned back from bracha into a klala. So the whole thing obviously is einoi moving klal. If everything was turned back into a klala, so why did Rebbeinu Shalom turn it into a bracha? And then it got turned back into a klala. It could have just let him be mekalel. If in the end of the day, there's one bracha out of this whole thing, and that's the matoivu oyalecha Yaakov mishkaneisecha Yisrael. Everything else is geblibma a klala. So maybe we can say like this. You know, there's a pasuk in Mishlei Chav Ches, Chav Gimel, that says Moichiach Odom Acharai Chein Yimtza Mi Machlik Loshen. Somebody that gives Toichecho, that gives Musa, that gives rebuke. Moichiach Odom Acharai, somebody that's Moichiach Odom, and to make him follow me. Chein Yimtza, he finds more chein in my eyes, says the Rebbeinu Shalom. Mi Machlik Loshen, somebody that makes everything good. So Rashi brings over there in the name of the Tanchuma, and it also appears in the Medrash Rabbah in the beginning of Parshas Dvarim. Moichiach Odom Acharai Ze Moshe. Who is the Moichiach Odom Acharai that finds chein in the eyes of the Rebbeinu Shalom? That's Moshe Rabbeinu. Shoichiach es Yisrael Achar Kodesh Baruch Hu. And Yisrael is Nikru Odom Shenema Odom Atem. The name boy about Moshe Rabbeinu, it says Ki Motzaso Chein Be'ena. And he finds favor in my eyes, says the Rebbeinu Shalom, more than the Machlik Loshen. Who's the Machlik Loshen? It's that Bilam. He tells Klal Yisrael good things, Mesukin with a sof. Ma'toivu oyhalecha Yaakov. Moshe machriz hishomru lochem pen yiftel levavchem. Moshe gives it to them. He says, be careful, pen yiftel levavchem. Ubilam machnif umachriz asuta avaschem ve'enoi makbid. Lo yishel v'yechazev b'umes al b'chem oma v'lo yaseh v'shloim etzavech al shneim ne'emonim pitzei oyhev v'ne'etoris n'shikar seder. So the Medrash is saying that Moshe Rabbeinu gave Klal Yisrael harsh teichecha. Yishamru lochem pen yiftel levavchem. Bilam was a machlik lashon. He said, you guys are great. You're wonderful. I mean, you're perfect. I mean, just follow your hearts. Yeah, that's what Bilam is saying. But l'chayr it's a modna zach, because we know that hadavar asher yosim b'fi. That's what Bilam has to speak. He didn't say anything that Hashem didn't put into his mouth. It was a nevuah of aspaklaria ha'meira. B'mar eveloi b'chidos. So how can we blame Bilam for saying what he said? So maybe we can say that Avada, the words he had to say. But the kavana could be a positive kavana, could be a negative kavana. Now, when you give somebody praises, it could have one of two effects. Either it could empower him, it could encourage him to use his koiches and to bring himself to the next level, or it could, be like patting him on the back and making him feel good and listen, and so I'm great, and I have nothing more to do. So it could be that in that sense, the kavanah of the one that says it could impact the one that hears it. And when Bilam was saying these positive things about Klal Yisrael, his kavanah was really to praise them to the point that they will feel so good about themselves that they will fall into the trap of thinking that they are perfect and complete. And that had a negative effect on the Klal Yisrael, as we see that immediately after, the Vayeshev Yisrael b'Shittim Vayochelam Liznei B'nai Smoyov, right? The nefesh gevoya of Bilam had an impact on those that heard how great they are. And Kolam Izgor, the Gemara says in Sotah Avdalad, was Soif Nichshel Be'eshes Ish. So in other words, the Hachlokas Loshen has to do with the intent of Bilam, not with the content of what he said, but with the intent, with the kavanah, with what he was trying to accomplish. So now, that's why the brachas of Bilam are nefach l'klala. He said brachas, but a bracha could be a curse, because as we see, vayochel ha'om liznois el b'noi smoyov. So what's the pshat that hakoil chaza l'klala chutz mi bate knesiois u'bate midrashes. I want to say like this. It says, "Vayamoid malach Hashem b'mish oil hakromim goder mizeh vegoder mizeh." So it says in the Medrash, "Ein ato yochol lishloit bahem." The Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, the Malach is saying, you can't be shoylet on Yidin shebiyadeihem luchos ksuvim mishnei avreim, because they have luchos that are written from both sides. Mizeh u'mizeh ksuvim. So the Medrash is darshaning, goder mizeh vegoder mizeh. They have the luchos that are mizeh u'mizeh ksuvim. And that's why Bilam can't be shoylet on Klal Yisrael. So what's so special about the luchos that are mizeh u'mizeh that holds back Bilam? We find al derech zeh in the Gemara in Megillah Daf Tzvot on the pasuk v'tatzaveu al Mordechai ladas ma'zeh v'al ma'zeh. It says Shemo Ovru Yisrael al Chamisha Chumshei Torah Diksiv Bohem Mizeh u'Mizeh Ksuvim. So over here also there's a particular connection with the fact that the luchos are written from both sides. What does it mean that the luchos are written from both sides? The Zohar Chodesh in Rus uses the expression that the luchos were written ponim v'ocher, on the face and on the back, which maybe represents the idea that not only when we're in a state of gilui ponim, when we're face to face with the essence of reality, which is the Rebbeinu Shalom, ponim b'fonim dibra Hashem imochem, then we connect with the ksav v'hamichtov, but also when we're on the other side. In other words, also when we just see the back, when we experience hestapon. So mishnei evreihem means that even when everything looks upside down, we nevertheless are mishtadel to follow the Torah. And mida keneged mida, that brings about vayafich Hashem es haklol levrochen. Because if we experience klala as a bracha, it becomes a bracha. If we can experience the mizeh u'mizeh, in other words, that even the negative we experience in a positive way, that makes the negative into positive, right? So Mamela is like this. Yeah, we see Moshe Rabbeinu, Amalek has also to do the mizeh u'mizeh ksuvim shemva ovru Yisrael in the Sechtes Megillah, as we mentioned, because that also has to do with the mizeh u'mizeh. As we see that Moshe Rabbeinu appears twice in a milchama with Amalek. One time his milchama with Amalek is head on, and Moshe Rabbeinu has a milchama with Amalek. But then the Milchama with Amalek that we have on Purim is really the month that Moshe Rabbeinu died, which is a Zman of Hester upon him. It's a Zman of Riyah Maslayu Yisrael, but nevertheless, Yemei Evloi Shel Moshe brought about the Pulpuloi of a Snail Ben Knas, which is the Pchina of Hafachta Mispedi L'Mocheli. So you see, the brachas of Bilam all became a klala besides for one. And through that one, all the klalas turn back into a bracha. What's the one? Bate Knesiyos and Bate Midrashis. What's Bate Knesiyos? Bate Knesiyos are where we daven. Now, davening is something that becomes deeper and greater through Hester Ponim. Min hametzar korosiko lama hoyo hoimois akorois mipnei shak kodesh baruch hu misavel tfilos shel tzadikim. So tefillah is where the negative is transformed into a positive force, because the negative reality is what enables and what brings out the tefillah of min hametzar, and memela we create a positive energy through the negative reality. And the same thing is about the Bati Midrashis, which are where we learn Torah Shabbal Peh, about which we say Ha'om Ha'olchim B'choshech Ro Or Gadol. Yeah, the more things are not understood, the deeper we understand them in the end, because what's self-understood is not understood at all. And the less we understand, the more we ultimately understand. So that's really the Vayafoich Es HaKlola Livrocha Ki Ahevecha Hashem Alekecha. That's the Bate Knesiyos to Bate Midrashis, where we turn the negative reality into a positive force and a positive energy, and that is mahapach all the klolas into a bracha. Yeah, that's what I have to say.